Hi there, Paul, Zuva began. Zefunde, the boy responded, giving Zuva the go-ahead to tell the story. A long time ago, Zuva said, a girl learnt the hard truth of her heritage. In a dark cove, a strange voice had told the girl that she was the daughter of a king and her mother had been banished for falling pregnant out of wedlock and given birth to the girl in the forest. But the only claim the girl now had to royalty was a golden bangle. The strange voice had urged the girl to seek the bangle which had been hidden by her grandmother before she began the quest to regain her heritage. When the girl, Rashai, had gotten back home, however, it was to find her grandmother, Mbuyataka, the mushroom woman, having passed away. There was a great sadness in their small impoverished village, as Mbuyataka had been the kindest and warmest woman in their community, always giving and always lending her understanding ear to hear the concerns of those around her and never dishing out judgment. Rashai's heart tore when she learnt of her grandmother's passing. Mbuyataka had been the only guardian she knew, and now there was only her and Revai and Mosha, her two cousins, left in the family. As their fellow village members came to hold hands and pass their condolences, they could only wonder what would become of the three of them. But Rashai was also distracted throughout the funeral, and she wanted to tell her cousins of what had transpired in the forest. She was also agitated because the strange voice in the cove had told her that the key to her queendom in that distant land was the bangle that Mbuyataka had hidden. But now Mbuyataka was gone, and Rashai did not know where to look for the bangle. There was also no way that she could extract herself and her cousins from the funeral proceedings, as there were many people in the courtyard, with people continually asking for either a clay pot to fetch water from or some flint to help in igniting a fire. Soon enough, however, the funeral was over and the mourners bid their farewells. Know that our door is open to take you in at any time, the elderly couple said. Just because your grandmother has departed does not mean that you do not have family in this village. The trio had nodded. Continue to make your grandmother proud, you three, a young man whose leg had been amputated because of a severe case of gangrene, said as he balanced himself on his man-made crutches. You are a pride to our village, and we look up to your strength. Be strong for yourselves and this village. The trio had nodded again as another person came with strengthening words and a farewell, until at last everyone was gone and it was just the three of them in the courtyard. For a long moment they looked around, dazed, disoriented, like leaves that had been torn off a tree, and Revai burst out crying. Revai, at 14, was easily the most beautiful girl in the village, and at times was given to fences. She was always the first to complain, the first to cry, the first to grumble, and because she was pretty, everyone would tend to her complaints and cries. But now, as she cried, 16-year-old Mosha, who had not cried since he had heard of Mbuyataka's passing because he was a man, and 13-year-old Rashai, who preferred looking for solutions rather than wallow in self-pity, both broke down. The three of them stood in the center of the courtyard, hugging each other and weeping. It was Rashai who was the first to break out of the hug, wiping her tears and saying, "Guys, I have something to tell you." "What?" Revai and Mosha asked, sniffles dying down and wiping their tear-stained faces with their hands. Revai guided them to a bench and told them of the hands that had pulled her into the depths of the cove. "The strange voice told me that I am a princess, but I have to find a golden bangle to prove my link to royalty. However, only Mbuyataka would know where the bangle is." Revai forgot her grief and laughed. "And you believe you are a princess? You believe a strange voice whose face you did not see?" For a moment, Rashai also wanted to laugh it off. All of it was ridiculous, but then she remembered the certainty in the stranger's voice. I don't know what to believe, she said slowly. If only Mbuyataka was alive, I would ask her of the golden bangle. If she said she knew nothing about it, then I would have ignored the stranger's voice. But now a part of me wants to know if the bangle exists. Revai laughed again. Rashai, she said, you probably banged your head on the roof of the cove and started dreaming and hallucinating. If you were a princess, then how did you end up here and not in your faraway village? Rashai knew that Revai was making sense, but in your mind a million thoughts whirled. What do you think, Mosha? She asked their brother finally. We have not said anything. The boy shrugged. I don't know, little sis, he said, but since we will have to pick Mbuyataka's bedroom, we might as well look for a bangle. If we find it, then you would be lucky, I guess. But Revai chuckled and stood up. My head is aching, she said. You guys look for the fictitious bangle alone. I am off to bed and to get some rest. And she walked away. Let's go, Mosha said, standing up, and Rashai followed. Do you believe me, though? She asked. He looked into her face and smiled. I can't think of any reason why you would make that up. That afternoon and into the early evening, the two of them turned Mbuyataka's heart upside down, looking in every bend and nook, and underneath all clay pots and in every crevice in the heart, and still they found nothing. Later that evening, as they sat down to eat a meager supper, Revai arose out of her nap and came to join them by the fireside. Did you find it? She asked. They both shook their heads, and Revai tried as hard as she could not to laugh and hid her smugness in a fake cough. So what's next? She asked again. I will go back to the cove, Rashai said. I want to seek the woman who told me about the bangle. But I have been in the cove with you before, Revai said, and I never saw anyone else. To be honest, I think, Rashai, as much as I love you, little sis, I think you are hallucinating. There is no one there. She was quiet for a while, then she said, I think we should leave this place. The drought in the villages made this village dry and uninhabitable. Everyone who values their future migrated westward, where there are more valleys and there is more water. Mbuyataka is gone. She was the one who was keeping us here. Now there is nothing else holding us to this poverty-stricken, hungry village. As Revai spoke, Rashai knew that this was not a bad idea, but try as she might, she could not shake off the strange voice in the cove. Now both Mosha and Revai were looking at her intently. She sighed. Then in the smallest voice ever, she said, I understand that you guys have to go, and I know I am the youngest here, and I can't give you my blessing, but now I do. She was quiet, then sighed. A part of me wants to know more of this bangle. What if it is the key to my heritage? I don't know my parents, and I know from the whispers that have been said behind my back that Mbuyataka brought me back from the forest one day and then adopted me as his. What if this voice will lead me to my parentage? Revai scoffed. So you really think you are a princess, as the voice said? Do you not think that if you were a princess, you would be living in a royal house? Why would somebody abandon a princess in a forest? To suffer even? Rashai did not respond, but she knew Revai was making sense. Revai scooted over to the younger girl and enveloped her in a hug. Leave it, little sis. This strange hallucination will just hurt you. We are your family, Mbuyataka, Mosha, and me, and we love you like that. Now, we need to discuss what to do before we set out and leave this place. Do we bid our farewells or just disappear into the night? Rashai extricated herself from the hug and stood up, going to stand a distance from them. She thought of how in the last year, after the severe drought, people had started leaving the village in droves until only the infirm and the old remained. The three siblings had stayed because Mbuyataka was too old and too frail to leave, but with the old woman now dearly departed, surely there would be no need to stay. But now she thought of the community they would be leaving behind if they decided to look for wetter regions. As the three strongest individuals in the village, everyone was dependent on them for sustenance. She and Revai would bring fruit and mushroom for the 99 people strong village, while Mosha would bring the small animals that he caught in the forest, and every night the small village would congregate and share the spoils. What would happen to the villagers if they too migrated? She sighed and turned back to face her siblings. Go, she said. This is the only home I have ever known, and strange voice in the cove or not, and golden bangle or not, I am staying. I can't bring myself to desert the people who have come to rely on us. Imagine if we are to go. What will happen to the 3 orphaned Juru kids, or the sickly Nzombe or the elderly Matope couple who can't even join us for supper, and will we bring food for every night? No, I am not leaving, and no. She raised her hand to stop Revai in her tracks as Revai opened her mouth to speak. It's no use convincing me to go with you. I am not going, but you guys, go. She quickly brushed away the tears that her eyelids were barely raining in, and then hugged herself from a non-existent chill. Go, she said lightly. But then, for the first time in the exchange, Moshe spoke, his deep baritone firm and commanding. I am not going anywhere too, he said, much to Revai's stunned face. This is my land, my heritage, the land of my fathers and my forefathers, and my grandmother told me to safeguard this heritage for my children someday. I know that even though the sun scorches and burns us now, it will rain again and our land will flourish. Revai, you are my sister. You suckled our mother's breast after me, and I am your elder brother. I tell you now that we are not going anywhere. You will only leave this home after I receive the cows for your ro'ora. There was a long silence around the fireside. Then Revai sniffled. She stood and stormed off back to the girl's hut. Rashai came back to sit down, and Moshe took her hand in his. You and I might not have suckled the same breast, but you are as much a sister to me as Revai is, okay? Rashai sniffled and nodded. I don't know what to think about the strange voice in the cove and the bangle, he said, but I think we need to go back to the cove to ask the strange voice for more guidance. Okay? Rashai nodded again. And you're right about the role we play in taking care of the villagers. We can't leave the people here alone. That night, when Rashai finally retired to the girl's hut, she found Revai pacing around the hut fuming. Where will I find a boy to marry in this dull village with all the boys gone? She said to no one in particular. Stupid Mosha, he thinks he will get cows for who and where in this village. I would die an old spinster here. Rashai said nothing, but made herself comfortable and snuggled under the skins. When they woke up early in the morning to the sound of the one bed that remained in the village, they were hungry and there was nothing to eat around the homestead. We have to resume our normal duties, Moshe said to Rashai, who was rubbing the sleep off her face, and to Revai, who was still sulking. Both girls were too hungry and too thirsty to argue, so the 3 of them carried their pails to the nearby dry brook and drank to their bellies' content before lugging pails of water and emptying them in the center of the courtyard for the rest of the community to drink. When they were done with the water, they all stared at each other with an unspoken question. Do we go back to the cove? Revai shrugged, then hunger leading her, led the trio to the cove. You're not going hunting today, bro? Rashai quietly asked Moshe as they followed Revai. No, he responded. I don't feel like I should leave the 2 of you in the cove, especially after what you encountered. Besides, he chuckled, it's not like there are too many animals left in the forest. So the trio walked on, and when they reached the cove, there was nothing outside. In the preceding months, whenever Rashai and Revai had come to look for mushrooms in the cove, they had found a bag of grain and nuts and dried fruits together with some game meat by the entrance and a basket full of mushroom left by a mysterious stranger. But now there was nothing. The 2 girls looked at each other and shrugged. I guess we just have to collect the mushrooms ourselves then, Revai said as she led the way into the humidity and the darkness of the cave. As soon as Rashai stepped inside, the hairs on her nape stood and she shivered. Someone was watching. She quickly reached for Moshe's hand and he tightly squeezed it, letting her know that he understood what she meant. They reached the moister parts of the cove, and while Revai and Moshe petted the ground, then plucked mushroom, Rashai stood transfixed, feeling an intense pair of eyes on her. Then out of the blue she said to the thick air in the cove, "I couldn't find the bangle. When I left here, I found Mbuyataka gone." Both Moshe and Revai froze, waiting. When after a moment nobody spoke, they began patting the ground for more mushroom, but were immediately startled out of their wits when the strangest and rustiest voice they had ever heard spoke. "I am sorry," it said. "I am sorry for your loss. When you didn't return, I thought maybe you didn't want to find it. I thought you were not interested." Moshe, who had reached into his pocket to withdraw his spear, tried to inject some bravado in his voice, but it came out shaky when he asked, "Who are you?" The voice was so quiet for a while that the three of them began to imagine that they had fantasized it. Then finally it said, "I am a mother." Revai found the strength to chuckle and asked, "Whose mother? Anyone could be a mother." "Rashai's mother," it responded with no hesitancy in its words. Moshe's spear fell onto the hard floor with a clatter. Rashai held her breath in for the longest time that she began to feel like she was drowning and dying. Revai laughed and asked, "Are you dead or alive? Are you a ghost or are you real?" Again there was silence from the strange voice. Then Moshe said, "Show yourself." The trio had flint being scratched on a stone, then saw a flickering light, and then a lamp was lit, illuminating the cove with a dim light. Behind the lamp was the face of a pale woman, and Revai gasped, "It's a ghost," and made as if to bolt. But Moshe stomped on her feet, and she yelped and stayed. "What do you mean, Rashai's mother?" he asked. You could tell she was not a ghost, though she was rather pale. Her complexion was that of a person who had never stepped into the sun, of someone who had stayed in this cove all her life. But the woman's eyes were fixated on Rashai. "My daughter," she said, "my only child." Rashai was conflicted. She had wanted to meet her mother and her father all her life, to know where she had come from, but never in her imagination had she thought that the meeting would be like this. Also, a billion questions raced through her mind. Who was this woman? Where was she from? Where were her family, her husband, her other children? What was she doing living alone in a forest, in a cove? So she feebly said the only thing that came into her mind, "I don't believe you." The woman shook her head sadly, and still in her strange rusty voice she said, "I am sorry, Mwanangu. I have regretted the day I left you on the entrance of this cove 13 summers ago. But once I left you, and Mbuyataka found you, and took you to the village, and nurtured you like her own, I knew you were safer then." "Where are you from?" Moshe asked at just the same time that Revai asked, "Is it true that Rashai is a princess?" The strange woman sighed, then said, "I am from an eastern kingdom days away from here. The kingdom is called Gara. I left because I fell pregnant for the prince of the kingdom out of wedlock. Of course, I didn't tell them the prince was responsible. They would have killed me, so they banished me. So yes, Revai is a princess. She is the firstborn child of a Gara king." "So the story of the bangle is true?" Revai asked again. Her fear of seeing a ghost clearly vanished. The woman nodded, but her eyes were transfixed on Rashai. Then she said, "I am sorry, Mwanangu." Rashai shook her head as though to shake away the confusion in her mind. Then she reached for Revai's and Moshe's hands as they sat flanked beside her. "Let's go," she said. "We need to bring food for the people." And she rose. Revai and Moshe were conflicted too, but they had the certainty and authority in Rashai's voice, so they too rose. But as they made their way out of the cove, the strange voice called out, "Forgive me, my child. Forgive me, Manangu." Once outside in broad daylight, the trio stopped and looked at each other, no one saying a thing, and tears filling the coves in Rashai's eyes. For the first time since Mbuyataka's burial, in an act of compassion, Revai pulled Rashai into a hug and the younger girl sobbed into her shoulder. Between gulps and sobs, she told her siblings, "I don't believe it. I don't believe her." "What if," Revai began as she stroked Rashai's head, "what if she is right and she is your mother?" "Mother?" Rashai asked, shoving herself out of the embrace. "What kind of mother is she that abandons her child in a forest and then lets other people mother her own child? What motherhood is that?" Revai shrugged. "I don't know," she responded, "but you would have grown up in the forest, sitting in a cave, paler than the sun. Maybe she did you a favor, and you had a great upbringing, did you not?" Rashai scoffed. "So you are excusing what she did. So you are saying I should go back into that cove and hug her and say thank you for placing me into the hands of a stranger who could have beaten me or sold me off into servitude? Huh?" Revai shook her head. "No, I'm not saying that. At least not yet. We have to prove that she is indeed being truthful and find the golden bangle first. Then maybe we can come and take her and she will show you the way to your kingdom and you will become your princess and I will remain your sister and I will use your connections to find myself a rich man." Both Moshe and Rashai stared at her. Then Moshe shook his head and laughed. "Is that all you think of?" Rashai just shook her head, then sank down on a rock. She held her head in both palms. A million thoughts raced through her mind, and still she failed to follow one train of thought to its conclusion. Her head was aching, and she wanted a place to lie down and sleep. But Moshe crouched before her and looked into her eyes and asked, "What do you want us to do? How should we help you?" "I think Revai is right," Rashai said finally. "We need to find the bangle." "Okay," Moshe nodded. "But what about her?" He pointed towards the cove. Rashai shook her head. "I don't know," she said. "I don't know." As they walked back home, Moshe shot down a rabbit and checked his traps where he had caught some birds. They carried this to the village where they found the villagers sitting beneath the trees around buckets of water. Together the trio roasted their animals and fried the mushroom and began distributing the food equally amongst everyone. They sent a young boy Kuzo, who had been abandoned by his family as they migrated to the west, to take portions of food to those that could no longer walk, as the villagers said their prayers of thanksgiving and sat down to eat, conversations buzzing and laughter ringing. Rashai felt a stone sitting in her esophagus. Revai covered up her plate and said, "You will eat this later when you are hungry." But Rashai hardly heard her, and all she could think about were the secret places in which the bangle could have been hidden and the pale woman hiding in the forest. When later the rest of the village had retired to sleep, the trio sat and shared ideas of where the bangle might be. "We will need to look in the hearts again, this time more slowly, more methodically," Moshe said as they assigned each individual to each heart. But despite the meticulous search that they carried out, when they recongregated by the fire some hours later, no one had seen a glint of the jewelry anyway. "Besides this place," Rashai asked as they sat by the fire, "what other area could Mbuyataka have hidden the artifact?" The cove, Rashai and Moshe said simultaneously. It was their favorite place in the world, Rashai continued. She always said that the place was tranquil and allowed her to think. While Moshe nodded to Rashai's plausible explanation, Rashai was shaking her head. The strange woman would have said it's in the cove, the girl said. She made it seem like it was somewhere within this village. So they searched again and again. They sat and listed all of Mbuya Taka's haunts, her backyard garden, her field a kilometer away from the home, her stall in the marketplace where she used to sell her mushroom, her resting place beside the gnawed baobab by the edge of the village. They went to all those places and searched and still found nothing, no hint of a secret hiding place where the bangle could have been hidden. And yet, every day Rashai always insisted. We should search by the cove, she suggested. If I were Mbuya Taka, I would hide the bangle by the place I found the baby. But Rashai would insist that the woman had made it seem like the bangle was in the village. And if it was in the cove, then surely the strange woman would have seen it and would just have told her where the bangle was. But despite her insistence, her reluctance to go back to the cave was fueled by two fears. The fear of meeting that woman again and having to imagine that she was her mother, and the fear of having to learn that the woman was probably lying. In her mind, she too knew that the cove was the best place to search for the bangle because Mbuya had spent a majority of her time there looking for mushroom. But she was scared that the hope that she had begun to entertain of having a real mother and of perhaps being a princess in another world would vanish like smoke. She had managed to engineer her brother and her sister to not have to visit the cove for mushroom again, but instead to go further into the forest to look for dried nuts and small birds and animals and anything else they could find to tame the famine hunger. And for once, Rashai, who always had something to complain about, allowed her to lead them into the forest in search of something to eat. But as the days turned into weeks and then moons, and the search for the bangle became more and more futile, and as food got scarcer and scarcer in the forest, and they had to travel further to find sustenance, she knew she had to go to the cove. One early morning, before the earliest of the 9 remaining crows in the village crowed, Rashai slipped out of hers and Rashai's heart. Wrapping her skins tightly around her freezing body, she tiptoed out of the sleeping village, and her legs involuntarily led her to the cove. As she got closer, her heart started to beat faster, and a thought in her mind told her to flee. But resolutely, she put one step before the next, then the next, then the next. As she drew closer to the mouth of the cove, she was startled and her skin dropped to the ground when the strange voice said, "I thought you were never going to come back." She looked up, and there, at the entrance to the cove, the strange woman sat, looking at her with a sadness deepening the lines around her face. "My daughter," she said feebly as Rashai approached. From a distance, Rashai stared at her for a while. In her mind, she wanted to tell the woman that they couldn't find the bangle, but all that came out of her mouth was a weak "Why?" Tears poured in the woman's eyes. Then she hoarsely said, "I didn't know what I would do with you out here in the wilderness. I wanted to give you a better life." But Rashai was shaking her head vehemently in denial of what the woman was saying. "A better life? By leaving me on a forest floor? What better life is that?" The woman was crying now, and her posture was drooped in sorrow. "My daughter, I have wrestled with my mind every day since I made the decision. Every day I have wished I made a better choice, that I had kept you with me. I know it's not an excuse, and I do not expect you to either understand the decision that I made all those years ago. I was young, Rashai. I had been banished from the life I knew. I had no hope for the future. I did not feel fit to be a mother. And I know deep down that had I kept you, I would not have mothered you well. My mind was too fearful, too scared, too unstable to be a mother. A series of sobs engulfed her, and she heaved and hiccuped for a long while Rashai stood from a distance, hugging herself and watching this woman who was her mother. A part of the determined resolve to not care for this woman was stripped away, and she wanted to go and embrace her and tell her it would be all right. But the determined girl in her refused to be moved, and she continued to watch for a while. I am sorry, Mwanangu, the woman said as the hiccups and the sobs abated. Please forgive me. Rashai said nothing. She was thinking of the nights when Moshe had shared with his sister Revai the little memories he had of their mother, of how their mother had always smiled easily, of how her scent was a mixture of smoke and wood, and the soft hugs she had always reserved for her children. As he had spoken, Rashai had always sat there, wondering how a mother's embrace felt and how a mother felt like, wondering where her own mother was. And now, here she was, pale, haggard, old, lost, alone. Yet she, Rashai, had been lucky. Even with no mother, she had always felt safe and loved. She had always had a community around her. Perhaps this woman was right, and she had been better off with Mbuyataka. So she asked the woman, "Why should I trust you?" The woman was silent for a while, then she said, "Because I am now willing to risk it all for you. I will come out of this hiding place and live in society like a normal human being. And the day you will decide to go back home and reclaim your heritage, I promise to accompany you and speak my truth so you get your exoneration and the seat that you deserve." Rashai took a deep breath, then tentatively, as dawn broke across the western sky, she took a step forward, then another, until she got close to the woman, and they embraced each other and wept for a long time. When finally Rashai stood, she told her newfound mother, "I still do not trust you, though." The mother nodded. "I know, my child, but I promise I will work hard to regain the lost trust." Rashai nodded too. She stepped away and looked around her, realizing that it was getting light, and soon Moshe and Revai would be looking for her. So she told her new mother the purpose of her visit. "We couldn't find the bangle. Do you think it is here?" The woman sighed. "I know where it is, but I cannot say because the bangle is protected by enchantments cast by Mbuyataka. If I speak, before I open my mouth, I will be struck mute. So unfortunately, you have to find the bangle alone." Rashai asked, "So you cannot give me a clue?" "Think," your mother said in a strange voice. "What is it that your grandmother loved doing?" Rashai shrugged. "She loved collecting mushrooms," she said. "She taught us how to differentiate the poisonous and the unpoisonous. If she was not here collecting mushrooms, she would be in the village preparing to sell them, in the market selling them, at home cooking them for our meals, or drying them by a fire so we would eat them at a later date." The woman nodded. "So the bangle is here in the cove then?" The woman neither nodded nor shook her head, but that was answer enough for Rashai. For a moment, she stood mentally scratching her head, trying to find clues in the conversations she had had with Mbuyataka. She continued to pace around the entrance of the cove, and then her eye saw the bloody red mushroom, leaning against its very red pears in a corner. Mbuyataka's words about the mushroom quickly came back to her. The bloody red mushroom, the firifiti, Mbuyataka had always warned as she taught them mushroom picking on their forays into the forest, is the most poisonous mushroom of them all. It grows in the moistest parts of them all and looks ready to eat, but do not be deceived. Even when you accidentally step on it, its poison will be so potent that it will seep into your body, and there is no cure for the poison once it's in the body. So they had always stayed away from the clusters that congregated at the different parts of the cove. But now the mushroom stood proud and fresh in a dry and arid corner despite loving moisture. Even as she stared, she knew. She knew from the songs of the Filifiti that Mbuya Taka had always sung for them. She knew that in the dry and arid corner was the answer to her heritage. Quickly, she grabbed a stick and approached the mushroom. From a distance, she poked the clump of mushroom and nothing moved. They were not real, she realized. They were decoys. So she moved closer and, discarding the stick, she knelt closer to the mushroom. But a blood-curdling scream rent the air, and turning back, Rashai saw Revai's mouth wide open and Mosha frantically rushing towards her to stop her. "Don't touch," Revai said, but Rashai quickly grabbed the largest mushroom and wrenched it off the soil, and there, nestled in its fake roots, was a golden bangle glinting back at her in the early morning rays. Their 6 eyes popped as the sun's rays caught all corners of the bangle, and it winked at them delightedly. Revai gently reached for it and extracted it from the fake roots. "It's heavy," she said, in awe of the beautiful trinket that lay in her hand. She turned to Rashai and exclaimed, "You are a princess, little sister, a real-life princess. Here, give me your hand." Rashai outstretched her hand, and as if the bangle had been made for her hand, it opened up briefly to cover her palm before snugly sitting on her wrist and hugging it like it belonged there. "Princess Rashai," Revai said, grinning and pulling Rashai into a hug, and a few seconds later, Mosha joined them. Then after a long moment, they pulled apart and Mosha broke the enchantment of the moment. "What's next then?" he asked. "We go to the kingdom, to Rashai's home," Revai responded without even bothering to consult Rashai. "But what about her?" Moshe said, pointing at the woman hugging herself and smiling lightly by the cove's entrance. "She goes with us too," Rashai responded. And though Moshe and Revai's eyes widened, they said nothing. They knew what their little sister meant. The end. Zuva finished. The boy Mnyaradzi was quiet for a while. "So, did they go?" he asked. "Did they go back to Rashai's village?" Zuva just smiled. The boy sighed. "I'm also curious to hear what they did with the community of villagers before they set out for their village." Zuva laughed. "All in good time," she said. "Now, run on home before it gets late." And the boy stood and ran back home. The real end. Thank you guys for listening all the way to the end. The Zuva series will definitely continue next week, and we'll get to hear more of what happens to Rashai and what happens to the Gara kingdom. So please do make sure to tune in next Saturday. I'll be here and I'll be waiting for you. Also, don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and share with others. Enjoy. Have a lovely time. Love you long time. Goodbye.